lower than he was probably lower than the mid 50 of most schools, to be very honest with you. So I went through the college admissions process with my own daughter on the other side of the table as a parent. And I was that parent that started reaching out to admissions representatives. And I would ask the question, look, here's her profile. This is who she is. She does have a learning disability. She has an IEP. Should she even apply? And what the reps said to me, they were always so honest. They were so encouraging. And ultimately, she did get into her first choice school, which again was Sacred Heart University up in Connecticut. So that was the genesis. That was how the podcast came about, because I felt that the reps was so awesome. And it just occurred to me, if I had a podcast where each episode was me talking to an admissions representative about their academics, their social life, but more importantly, really getting into the details of their application review. If I could give this to parents on demand in the form of a podcast, I'm hoping to add value. And I thought, wow, maybe I'm onto something. So I sent an email to about 9 or 10 reps, and immediately I had about 5 that said, absolutely, we'll come on your podcast. And that's when I panicked because I didn't really have a podcast yet. I didn't know how to record. How do you edit? How do you get it on Spotify and Apple and all of the other platforms? And so, like any other good academic these days, I went to Google and searched and learned. And as of today, I have 284 podcast episodes that are live. So I'm here today to talk to you about really a summary of all of the things that I've learned while doing this podcast with, like I said, over 250 episodes, talking from college admissions reps from pretty much every corner of the United States. So one of the things that I definitely learned was that there are things that we can control, and there's a lot that we don't control in the college admissions process. And I think that if we look at it from that lens and really understand, first off, the things that we don't control, and then we'll get to the points where we do control it. But if we really look at it and understand how that's really important for you to take into account when you're going through the process, I think it'll be very helpful. So the one thing that I want to talk to you about are institutional priorities. And I had just done this presentation and someone recommended, rather than just reading quotes, and there's definitely a lot of quotes from definitely a lot of admissions representatives here, but rather than just reading the quotes, it was suggested that I actually embed some of the audio links. So when talking to the reps about institutional priorities, they really gave insight in terms of what they are. So the first quote is from Rick Clark. He's the Assistant Vice Provost and Executive Director of Admissions at Georgia Tech. Rick has been on twice already, episodes 92 and 200. He's awesome. And listen to what Rick said about institutional priorities.
Well, here's one thing is every college, no matter how big or small they are, starts with one very key driver for their institutional priority, and it is called class size. That is institutional priority number one.
So that's something to keep in mind in terms of class size, because I'm going to show you a lot of examples throughout the podcast episodes how that institutional priority that every school has, which is what is the number in terms of the incoming freshman class that they're trying to admit. We'll talk more about that later. But the second person I want to add from one of the podcast episodes was Jeff Salingo. Now, Jeff Salingo is amazing. He's a journalist, an author. He wrote the book, Who Gets In and Why. I met him at one of the national conferences, and it was so great that he agreed to come on. And he was in episode 204. So when I asked him about, what are some of the things that are surprising about the college admissions process, here's what Jeff had to say.
Probably, the biggest takeaway is that we tend to think admissions is about the students, is about the seniors applying to college. It has everything to do with the college and university and not very much to do with the students at all, right? It is very much a process driven by the colleges and universities. It's about their priorities, and their priorities are delivered through the admissions office. Whether that is they want more full payers, they want more kids from a certain geographic part of the country. They could be very narrow in terms of they need a third baseman for the baseball team, things like that. So it is all about their priorities, which is one big takeaway from the book.
So I wanted to share this with you because many times when we don't get admitted to a school or we're on the dreaded wait list or what have you, immediately we think it's something that we did. So I want to emphasize the importance of understanding institutional priorities. So again, Jeff talked about the fact that some schools might simply want full payers, right? People that could pay the full bill. Or it might be something like you said, that particular year, they need a third baseman for the baseball team. And the issue is that these priorities, they shift from year to year, institution to institution, and you don't necessarily know what they are. So in talking to Jason McGrath, now Jason at the time was the director of undergraduate admissions at UNC Chapel Hill. He was episode 199. He has since left. This is like a month ago. He's now over at Worcester, which is his alma mater. But this is what he said about UNC and their institutional priorities.
I know it's hard for students, right? It's hard to be waitlisted and have to wait for an answer. But as an institution, and I haven't stated this yet here, at Carolina, we have an obligation as a state institution that 82% of our incoming first-year students are North Carolina residents, and only 18% can be non-residents. And so as such, using the wait list allows us to make sure that we're making that number happen and that we're not going to exceed one way or the other. Because there's actually institutionally, there's financial penalties if you exceed those, don't hit those numbers more than 1 year in a row.
So again, what Jason is talking about is the institutional priority at UNC Chapel Hill, where they can only accept 18% outside of the great state of North Carolina. Now, what he also shared in the podcast episode is that out of that 18%, 6 or 7% are your international students. So in general, you're looking at 12% from the United States that don't live in the great state of North Carolina that are accepted year to year as part of their institutional priority. So I think once we start to understand some of this, it really puts a lot of things into context. Now, in the second quote with Jeff Salingo, he also mentioned the fact that geographic location for many is an institutional priority. So this is an example straight from Emory's website where they actually have a map on their admissions page giving you the percentage of students that were accepted from each corner of the United States. And in the center on the bottom, you can see that they have about 18% of the students from outside of the United States. And although we didn't get into specific details about it, I'm willing to bet that the percentages from the Midwest, the West, and of course the Southeast, where Emory is actually located, it's probably in proportion with the percentage of applications that they receive. The point being is that Emory is making it very clear that the geography, right, trying to get students from around the country is something that is near and dear to them. So I say all of this because, again, I want you to keep that in mind as we talk more about the college application process, those institutional priorities. Now, before we go deeper into that, I want to talk about rankings and the 15% consideration. Now, I can't see all of you, but I'm willing to bet that since I have a list that talks about college rankings, some of you are probably squinting your eyes. You're probably looking at that list of 25 to figure out which 25 are on that list. We've become trained with that. We've become trained at looking at rankings and try to figure out, what are those 25 schools? But Tim Fields out of Emory, he was a great guy. I love Tim. He was on episode 68 and 211. He talks about the fact that there are over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, 2,000 of which, offer bachelor's programs. And yet, for whatever reason, we focus on 100 of those schools. And the problem is that if you look at the 15% consideration, and what I mean by that is that if you're applying to schools where their acceptance rate is 15% or less, you have to understand, and it's going to become even clearer with data as part of this presentation, that a school that has a 15% admission rate or less, that is a reach school for everyone. You can have an A average, be the captain of the soccer team, president of the senior class, 15% or less in terms of the admit rate, that's going to be a reach school for everybody. And so to understand a little deeper these competitive pools, I want to look at Notre Dame University, which was just released not too long ago on the podcast. The follow-up episode, anyway, was episode 280. Let's take a look at that freshman class. So as Rick Clark mentioned earlier in the audio clip, every school has an approximate freshman class that they're looking to admit. That's their institutional priority. For Notre Dame, it's actually about 2,100. They receive 30,000 applications. I'm going to repeat that. 2,100 applicants, that's who they're trying to admit as their freshman class. They receive 30,000 applications. So they know based on their yield that they have to admit only 3,300 students to get that yield of around 2,100 students, meaning that their acceptance rate is approximately 11%. These are real numbers, and most colleges proportionally match these numbers. So what about the first 30%? So based on all the institutional priorities, based on numbers like this, the first 30%, it comes up a lot in the podcast episodes, the first 30% of the students that are frankly rejected, those students in terms of their academic and even their activities, in terms of their profiles, they're really not that different than the students that were admitted, except that, you know, with 30,000 applications, and you're only looking to admit 2,100 students to come in as your freshman class, obviously there are going to be students that are deserving, but that's the problem. There's usually more students, more deserving students than seats available at any given college. So I say all of this just because I want to emphasize that a lot of times you're put on a wait list, sometimes you're rejected, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you did anything wrong, right? It's just the institutional priorities that I want to make very clear to everybody. So what do you control? So clearly we talk a lot about academic, social, and financial fit, and we'll talk about those in a second. But I want to also talk about the importance of location. I always share the story of my oldest daughter who just graduated from Fairfield University up in Connecticut, and she's, you know, my math teacher now. When she was about 15 years old, she was excited about wanting to go to Penn State University. And I have to tell you, I was even more excited for her because I envisioned going out there as often as possible to see the football games and to really immerse myself in that kind of a culture because I didn't have that experience growing up going to Stony Brook University as an undergrad. So when we visited, first thing that my daughter realized it was that it was about 6.5 hours from our house. And that meant something to her because Alyssa, my oldest, you know, she's very big on wanting to come home if it's somebody's birthday or if there's a holiday. She liked the idea of being away, but she realized quickly she didn't want to be that far away. And we were lucky when we visited Penn State, which, by the way, I would have loved to have gone to a school like that personally. But we found out by visiting that it wasn't the right fit for my daughter. Number one, because of the 6.5 hour drive, but also because when we were there, she was scared, if you will, at the time when she was 15 at the large size, but we walked into a lecture hall. And so it's an auditorium with a lot of students in the lecture hall, and many of them were actually in the lobby, just sprawled out literally on the floor, listening while typing away on their laptops. My daughter looked at me and said, "Dad, what is this?" And that was a turning point. Like I could tell she was a fish out of water. And I explained what a lecture hall was, which is something that I had for my core courses at Stony Brook University. And clearly she understood that by doing that trip, by taking that trip, it wasn't the right fit for her. It would have been great for me, but it wasn't the right fit for her. So it goes back to what we were saying earlier. There are over 4,000 colleges and universities in the country. There are more than one school that is going to be the right fit for you, but not every school is the right fit for you. So although my daughter thought that was going to be it for her, she quickly learned that it wasn't the right fit. A quick thing about academic fit here. In the beginning of the podcast episodes, when I was really trying to figure out, I did a couple of episodes where I actually had student athletes that played at the collegiate level. So one of my former students, Jack, who I adore Jack, he's a great kid. He actually played lacrosse at Yale University. So Jack has since graduated, but when I had him on the podcast episode, he talked about fit and the importance not only of academic fit, but also, you know, athletic fit, which is the thing that he focused on. He focused on the athletic fit. And for whatever reason, Yale, that's where he wanted to go. He knew from ninth grade, that's where he wanted to go. And he told me what happened was in his freshman year, this thing called the pandemic hit. And lacrosse was over. There was no lacrosse, but the academics were still there. So he found himself in class with all the valedictorians and salutatorians of the country. And although Jack could handle himself and he graduated and did fine and is still doing well, he cautions that if you're going to pick a school because of athletics, don't forget to look at the whole picture. the academic fit in his case is really what he emphasized. So what other things can you control? We talk about this all the time, the importance of a balanced list. Safety, target, and reach schools. Safety schools, obviously, those are schools that your profile exceeds the average admitted students, right? The average 50% that's published on all schools' websites. Target, those are where you match the mid 50%. And of course, reach schools, which your profile is below. So it's important to have a balanced list. And I say that because a lot of times there are people that are overly ambitious, right? They only want to apply to reach schools. So here's an example, and these are just examples of a student that applies to 8 reach schools and only 2 target schools. And I caution you in a situation like that because, again, regardless of how strong you are academically and how strong you are even as a community member, schools that have admit rates of 15% or less, those are reach schools for anybody and everybody. And we go back to the example of Notre Dame University, where they get 30,000 applications and they're looking to have a freshman class of only 2,100. You also don't want to be that student that lacks full self-esteem, right? Where you're only applying to safety schools. Now, when I last presented, someone said, well, what if the child only wants safety schools, they want to play it safe? That's fine, but they should definitely try a few targets at the very least, because if you're only applying to safety schools and you're not trying to stretch and reach a little bit, you just never know. So I always talk about the importance of a balanced list. Now, you don't have to quote me on these numbers. This is just an example, but I like this example because it's a perfect bell curve. 2 safety schools, 6 target, 2 reach goals, right? This is a prudent and practical student. This is someone that understands that most likely, hopefully, you're going to get into a target school. Maybe you'll get into a reach, and hopefully those safety schools are going to be a shoe-in for you so that ultimately you're going to have many acceptances and plenty to choose from. So let's talk about what else you control in the college admissions process. And I think it's important to understand, we talk about this all the time, the holistic review process, which means that admissions reps, they report on this every single episode. They review holistically. And what they're saying is that it's not just one thing. I love what Tim Fields out of Emory said. He said, when talking about standardized tests, which we're going to talk about in a second, even deeper, but he talked about the fact that he's been in college admissions for 20 plus years, and there's never been a case where, because of a standardized test, a student was admitted. It's more of a holistic review. So understanding the different components and how they complement each other and how they're supposed to build upon each other without repeating time and time again the same information throughout is key. While keeping in mind 2 things. The colleges are looking for, number 1, can you handle the work? And number 2, what type of community member you're going to be. So in terms of the academics, can you handle the work? Don't deny the fact that retention rate in terms of, the students that come back after freshman year, but also graduation rates, that's very important to each and every college. So yes, they absolutely want to make sure that you can handle the work once you're on their campus, but they also want to know the type of community member you're going to be, the type of roommate you're going to be, the type of classmate you're going to be. So we're going to take it piece by piece and explain how all of the different components come into play. So the first part is the transcript. And what's important about the transcript is to understand that just like they look at your overall application holistically, they look at the application holistically, meaning that they're looking at 4 years of high school. What did you select? How did you do? If there was a bump, did you bounce back? And so they're looking at 4 years of opportunities, the ramps that you built, the challenges that you took, and of course, the grades that you took. Now, Leticia Garay, she was the Assistant Director of Admissions at UC Davis. She was back on episode 71. She talks about the 9th grade courses in the UC system. So let's hear what Leticia has to say.
We are using a GPA, but it is not as shown on your transcript. So this applies to the entire UC system in that we calculate our own GPA using grades earned from summer after 9th grade all the way through summer after 11th grade. We still ask for students to report 9th and 12th grade courses and grades for ninth grade, but we use it more as a trend to see like where the student or how the student has progressed throughout their years, and not calculated in the GPA.
Yeah, so I just want to point that out because a great question to ask when you meet with an admissions representative is, do you use the GPA indicated on the transcript or do you recalculate? And if they recalculate, you could ask them questions such as, do you look at 9th, 10th, and 11th grade? 12th grade, of course, they're seeing the work in progress, but they're not going to have the grades at the time of application. So that's a good question to ask. And what Leticia is explaining here is that in the UC system, first of all, they do recalculate the GPA, which many schools do, really to level the playing field, because you could imagine that there are students applying from hundreds, if not thousands of high schools. And those of us that are in the high school world, we can tell you, and you guys know it yourselves, there's really no two schools that have everything that's identical. There are schools that have 20 APs. There are schools that only have 5. There are schools that have restrictions on how many you can take. There are schools that weight courses. There are schools that don't. And so schools like that are under the umbrella of the UC system, they recalculate really to try to level the playing field. Now, in terms of what she was saying, the ninth grade grades are not calculated as part of the GPA. However, they are looked at as part of the overall holistic review process. And what I also learned when I did the podcast episodes with Carnegie Mellon and also Emory, they said the same thing. The ninth grade grades, they see it, but when they're recalculating their GPA, they're basically looking at 10th and 11th grades only. And another question to ask reps, if you're on the topic with them in terms of whether they recalculate, is when they recalculate, are they looking only at the core subjects or are they looking at all subjects, which is something that changes from school to school. And a word about the context of what your high school offers. You really want to familiarize yourself with something called the school profile. So a school profile is something that every high school sends college admissions reps that really gives them context in terms of everything that we talked about. Are you an IB school? Are you an AP school? There's grade distributions as well. Many times they're showing the percentage of students that get within the A range, within the B range, really giving the college admissions reps context into what is available at your high school. So you probably know that by default if you're a student or a parent of a student in a high school, but looking at the actual profile, I think is very important because you're going to see a window in terms of what the admissions reps see and their perceptions of whatever high school you're in. But Barclay Barton talked about, in every episode this comes in, how he said, we review the academic curriculum through the lens of the student's high school. And he repeated it again. He said, I think I need to say it again. We review the academic curriculum through the lens of a student's high school. And I repeat this because many people think that, well, my child's high school only offers 5 advanced courses, but the school down the road, right? And there's always that school down the road, they offer 20. And so is my child going to be at a disadvantage? And time again, this whole point about how they're reviewed based on the context of the high school is talked about. The other piece of the overall application is the activity sheet. Do not take for granted, and the typical thing that we think about is, if my child is in theater, in athletics, all of the clubs, if you're on the executive board, what have you, that's the typical stuff that we write about. But when I interviewed Andrea Flores, who's the assistant director of recruitment at Florida State, she talked about, and not only her, this is a theme that comes up a lot in the podcast episode, they caution that if you, for example, students hold a job because you have to help the family, or maybe, you have to get home because perhaps it's a single parent situation where, your parent is working and you have to be home to care for younger siblings, anything like that, do not forget to include that. In other words, anything that's going on outside of school, include it, because if you leave it up to the reps and they're seeing gaps in your activity sheet, you don't want to leave it up to them as to speculate as to why. So if you're working or if you're a caretaker for siblings, perhaps you have to accompany an elderly relative to the doctor's office because they don't speak English and you're there to translate for them. Whatever the situation is, include it. Because anything that you don't include, now you're leaving it up to the reps to speculate as to why. So if they see that you don't have any activities at all in your school, but you neglected to put the fact that you're working every single day after school to help the family, it really is a missed opportunity. So they caution all the time to include everything, as part of that. So the personal statement is very important because it's the first place where you are giving insight into your voice. And the reps get very excited about this. And in fact, when they're in the heart of application review season, they're reading probably about 40 essays a day. And what they caution is that you want to stand out in this very competitive thing we call the college process. So there are two themes that they caution to consider staying away from, but if you're going to use them, I'll explain what they talk about in terms of what to include. But the two themes that they see over and over again is number one, when a student talks about a loved one. And so what happens is the student will talk about the loved one, will talk about grandma. Perhaps grandma came from another country. Perhaps grandma, is an amazing cook, an inspiration, a hard worker, lots of sacrifice. And the whole personal essay, the personal statement is about grandma. And the reps will say, we want to admit grandma, but we learn nothing new about the student in that personal statement. Same thing is true with sports injuries. You might be a soccer player and your activity sheet is filled with all the accolades that you had through soccer, and your personal statement is about the fact that you love soccer, you played, you got injured, and now you don't play anymore. And that's it. And what they're saying is they want to hear your reflection. What was the thought process? What were the questions that you pondered? How did you pivot? How did it make you better? Right? How did it make you who you are today? And frankly, who you're going to be in the future. So Joa Howard, who's out of UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, he talked about if you want to talk about grandma or a relative, it's very important to speak to them maybe 10% just to set the context, but you have to be mindful of 90% of it should be about you. And I repeat again, when reps are talking about, reviewing 40 essays a day, if you want to stand out in an application pool, maybe you want to consider, doing a topic that's not so common. And so I've had, like I said, as of today, we have 284 episodes available. I do want to share some examples of what reps have said were memorable personal statements that we learned over the podcast episodes. And you're going to see quickly that it's not so much what the topic is, but they talk about how it's taking the topic and making it near and dear to you, explaining again your thought process, how you pivoted, what was your reflection. And so, for example, the first that I want to talk about is the dining room table. A rep shared how one student talked about the dining room table, but from the context of that table being there for the family gatherings, the love that was shared, the arguing that was shared, the holidays, and the evolution of the conversations that have taken place at that table. Similar to that, another example was being driven to school. So one example was a student talking about how his or her parent drove them to school every day and the evolution of those conversations from when the child was in elementary school to now being a high school student. And they were able to talk about that to just give a unique spin on their personalities. A family recipe is another one that came up as a great memorable one where they talked about a specific dish, a specific meal that was near and dear to that particular family, but the student took each recipe and talked about how the recipe related to them. They talked about how, when you eat this spice, it's very subtle in the beginning and unassuming, but then all of a sudden, you feel the flavor of it. And so using that to connect to who they are as a person. One of my favorites was Jason McGrath. He's the Dean of Admissions at the Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, up in Rhode Island, obviously. He talked about a student who wrote about loving Krispy Kreme donuts and how she would watch the donuts being made. And at one point, there was a donut that came out quite not the same as the others. And they put that donut aside because it was a little different. I guess they weren't going to sell it. So he talked about how this student wanted that donut because the donut, although it looked a little different, tasted the same, made her happy. And so she used that as an analogy, as a comparison to really talk about who she was as a person, right? Now, I didn't read that essay, but it was really interesting that that's something that resonated with him. When I talk about personal statements, I can't, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the essays that worked, both on the Johns Hopkins University website and Hamilton College. Both colleges have these essays that worked, and it's really from students that were admitted. They were, the colleges were granted permission to publish the actual personal statements from students that were admitted. Each of them have like examples from 5 years back. So it's something that I always share with people on my email opt-in list or anyone else during the presentations, because if you're a student or a parent helping a student with the personal statement, it's always great to look at these examples just to hopefully give you inspiration. So with the supplemental, Ian Shackner from the ILR program at Cornell University, Ian's been on twice, episode 14, and recently, more recently on episode 240. He talks about the fact that with the supplemental, you want to stay away from the Google rule. In other words, you don't want to put anything in the essay that just shows you can find the name of something, that you could search the name of something, because he cautions that it's not about a good use of space, it's about the best use of space. So in this theme of the marketing package, where, understanding each component of the overall application, what each is meant for, and how they are supposed to build on the next without repeating, when it comes to the supplemental essay, the nuance to understand there is that you really need to demonstrate your understanding of the institution. And it's not just about doing a Google search in terms of what classes they offer. So for example, read the mission and philosophy statements of a college. And if you find, for example, that this is a school that's really big on interdisciplinary studies because they want their engineering majors to also be well-versed in business, because at that school, the interdisciplinary studies are important in the sense that engineering is also a business. And so the importance of having that experience for the students, if that's near and dear to them, and you're able to decipher that, whether you're reading the mission and statement or it's something that you learned in a podcast episode or even visiting college, it's important to demonstrate your understanding of their values. Talk about what you did in high school that's in line with that. Talk about why all of this resonates with you. And frankly, why you want to be at that specific university. And so one of the mistakes that comes up a lot with the supplemental is that, unlike the personal statement, where you could write your personal statement, whatever the topic is, talking about you, showing your personality, and you could use that personal statement for all of the schools you apply to, it would be a huge mistake if you tried to do the same thing with the supplemental, because what they're looking for in the supplemental is that you understand their institution, not the other one. So you can't write a supplemental, for example, for the University of Michigan and send it to 10 other schools that also require a supplemental. So, just something that I wanted to share with you in terms of the nuance between a supplemental and the personal statement. Letters of recommendation, very important. But one of the things that we caution to students is that, teachers are well-meaning, they want to help, but some of them get so many letters of recommendation. And so, no fault of their own, what ends up happening is they might repeat, right? This is what's reported on the podcast episodes. They might just repeat what's easily found on the transcript or the activity sheet, or both. She's in my English class, she's an outstanding English student. Well, if you look at the transcript, it's been A's throughout, your 4 years of high school with English. Missed opportunity. So what we always say is, with the letter of recommendation, if there's something specific that happened, whether it was with a club advisor, maybe it was an initiative that you started, maybe it was something that, you did in class, maybe it was a project that really stood out. If there was something that happened, don't be shy to ask the teacher if they would be willing to write about that specific thing, right? Be mindful of trying again to look at each part of the application where each complements each other, but at the same time builds upon the next. You don't want a letter of recommendation where someone is just repeating what's easily found elsewhere. My favorite letter of recommendation that I wrote for a student who, ironically, he just got married. I'm still actually in contact with his family. He was a 10th grader. I was in my office. I'm actually in my office right now. And I was here early checking email. I mean, like an hour before school was even starting. And all of a sudden, this young kid, 10th grader, comes knocking on my door. Excuse me, Dr. Durante, I just found this and I want to get it back to the rightful owner. Okay, you want to get it back to the rightful owner? Sure, come on in. What did you find? And he places on my desk $100 bill. True story. You know, $100 bill on my desk. And I said to him at that point in time, I said, listen, when you're ready for your college search process, I'm going to write a letter for you. And I'm going to talk about your integrity. I'm going to talk about the fact that you came in and you know, found this $100 bill. And rather than take it, with which, you know, many people would, I guess, you wanted to make sure it got back to the rightful owner. And so I did. I wrote that letter for him. And that's really what the reps are looking for. Something that, you know, you can't find so easily on the activity sheet or transcript. So be mindful not to be bashful to ask teachers if they could write about a specific thing. Quick word about standardized tests. People always ask me, is it a myth? You know, are they really test optional? So a typical question that I ask the college admissions reps are, you say that you're test optional. What's the percentage of students that not only applied, but who were also accepted without having submitted test scores? And overwhelmingly, it's actually 50-50. And I'm not talking about the Ivy League schools, right? Or your really, really competitive schools that, by the way, the Ivies went back to requiring them. But for the most part, it's 50-50. There are some schools that are slightly more competitive, and so it's a 60-40 split. But if they say they're test optional, they're test optional. You have to believe them. And I'm going to talk about something called the common data set next, where you're going to actually see where you could find out, you know, a little bit more information about each institution. But what they recommend is, number one, look at the mid 50% of the schools, being mindful of the fact that nowadays the mid 50% is skewed. It's obviously a little higher than what it used to be 7 years ago, because only students that are scoring well are submitting. And so by default, the mid 50% range is higher. So what about submitting scores? Well, very simply, if you're in the mid 50% or higher, and you feel that that one data point, the standardized test, is going to add to your overall application, certainly submit your scores. If not, you know, you're not feeling good about it, you feel that your transcript is a better indicator how you perform academically, then in a school that says they're test optional, don't submit the test. Time and time again, they talk about the fact that if they are saying that they're test optional, they mean it. And one of the things that I want to talk about again is something called the common data set. So here's an example of Tulane University, very competitive school, great school down in New Orleans. And so here's an example of students who applied, 27,936. The total students who were admitted, 4,077, to yield that freshman class, students who enrolled, of 1,867. Similar to what we looked at in terms of Notre Dame University earlier. So I want to show you the consistency, but more importantly here, in the common data set. And by the way, how do you find the common data set? Just search. Common data set, XYZ University.
I
So-
actually, John, just
Yeah.
put in the chat a resource. I have a
Yes.
short video. Oh, my camera got messed up. I have a short video on my website that shows people how to find the common data set. So I just put it over there in the chat so that families have it. I've been putting all kinds of stuff in the chat. I'm busy over here.
Great. Thanks for your help, Lisa. You're awesome as always. So the thing that I wanted to point out on this slide from the common data set, which I think is a great resource for students and parents to be familiar with, is the fact that approximately 45% of the enrolled students submitted an SAT or an ACT. And if you look at the bottom where I circled in red, it gives you the actual breakdown. So percentage of students submitting an SAT score, it was 14%. 31% submitted an ACT score. So when you think it's a myth, well, the common data set proves differently. And if you listen to the podcast episodes, it's a typical question that I ask. And overwhelmingly, you know, they give these numbers, and it's clear that it's about a 50-50 split usually. Tulane, I guess, is a little bit more competitive, so it's a 45-55 split. But you get the idea. I also want to show an example here from Notre Dame University. This is just another example of what you'll find in any school's common data set. They typically talk about the different things that they look at in their overall application review. And you can see clearly here that they list them as very important, considered, or not considered at all. So when you look at what I circled, that X, that's the standardized test. Notre Dame University, once again, talking about how, yes, tests are considered, but certainly not considered very important in their application review. I want to share this slide with you because another thing that happens so often around this time of year is that I'll get students that come to me, and for whatever reason up here in New York, and I'm sure it's the same, in Ohio or wherever you guys are listening from, the University of Michigan inevitably puts so many kids on the wait list, and students come to me, oh, Dr. Durante, I'm on the wait list, could you write a letter? Could you do something? And the first thing I say to students is, look, if you're going to add something at that point in time, other than what they asked for, which is usually a letter of continued interest, but if you're going to add anything, it really has to be something significant that is not already in your application. In other words, having a teacher write yet another letter talking about the fact that you're an A+ student is not going to help you. And if they're not asking for another letter of recommendation, I caution you not to. You want to just follow the directions of whatever the institution is asking for. But for example, a week and a half ago, we announced our valedictorian and salutatorian. And so after congratulating them and calling their parents, the next thing I asked them is, are you in college? Are you set on where you're going to college? And, this year one is and one is not. So the one that is not, and even the one that is, I said the same thing to let her school know. But the point is that for the student that's still waiting, I said it's very important that, the schools, whether you're on a wait list or you were deferred or whatever the situation is, they need to know about this new accolade that you were just selected as the valedictorian or salutatorian. But I want to just take a look at this really quick. Michigan University, the University of Michigan, okay? 87 plus thousand applications received. 15,000 students were offered an acceptance, okay? That's 18% of the applications. But if you look at where I circled in red, the first data point is the number 21,078. That is the number of qualified applicants offered a place on the wait list. So at the University of Michigan, based on the common data set, that you're seeing that more students, 21,000 plus, are given a seat on the wait list than their initial students that were admitted. Again, 15,000 plus were admitted, 21,000 plus were put on a wait list. Again, pointing to what we talked about in the beginning, the institutional priorities, right? They have a set goal to enroll approximately 7,500 students. They get 87,000 applications. We talked about the 30% rule, the first 30% that are rejected. Guess what? Their profiles are very similar, I guarantee you, because the reps report it to me every time, compared to the students that are admitted. So I want to share all of this because sometimes you put on the wait list, sometimes you're rejected and you think it's something you did. Not necessarily. So being educated and looking at the things that you control and don't control is important. And by the way, another shocking statistic here is that the number of waitlisted applicants sent an admissions offer, 77, not 77%, 77 only. So, some schools are obviously far more competitive than others. So I share this data just to give you a wide range and also reminding you about the fact that there's over 4,000 colleges and universities. There's a school for everyone, but not every school is for everyone. So, just reflect on that for a moment. Before we get to the end, a quick quote from Jason McGrath. He was at UNC again. He just talks about, and so did Christoph Guttentag. He's from Duke University. I had Christoph on twice. They talked about the importance of another mistake that people make is that they try to think about the students that were admitted. What did their profile look like? And, how do I emulate, students that were admitted? And they talked about the fact that it's a big mistake. If you try to sound like other people, you're going to sound just like that, like everyone else, and you're not going to stand out in a competitive application pool. So, be mindful of that. And really, the final thoughts is, the financial conversation, have it soon, have it early, have it often. And, and I say that because the reps also talk about the fact how a student is accepted to their first choice school, only to find out later that they really can't afford it, which is terrible for the whole family, the students, the parents, and it's also not great for the college as well. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to see that. So the financial conversation early, everything we talked about, finding that academic, social, and again, the financial fit, that balanced list of safety, target, and reach goals, and ensure that all parts of your application understand the purpose of each and how they need to complement each other and build upon each other without repeating. Focus on those things you control, right? Which is understanding the application and doing your best academically. And ultimately, really try to enjoy it. So we're getting to the end. I'm getting ready, Lisa, where I'm going to give out the book. So get ready with your little random number app. But I do want to point out that I have this thing, this QR code to what we call the virtual college fair. So about a year and a half ago, someone gave me a great suggestion because I was trying to make the point that in my podcast, episode 284 is no more or less important, frankly, than episode 210, right? And I was trying to figure out, like, how do I get people to look at all of the schools, and someone said something that was so simple but brilliant. They said, well, why don't you just put all the colleges in an alphabetical list with a link to each of them so that it's just that. It's an alphabetical list. You click on the name of the school and voila, you have a link to the audio conversation. And this has served so many students and their families because and I love the emails that I get. One in particular who said, we were driving to the University of Pittsburgh. We listened to the episode going there, and when we were on campus and we met with an admissions rep, we just had better follow-up questions because we had just heard a 45-minute conversation or whatever it was. So, take a look at this resource if you don't mind. Share it, use it. I think it's something that's very important. It's free, it's on demand, and good luck with it. And at this point, we'll talk just for a second about the book. Lisa's going to select some random winners. What happened with the book is when I was approaching episode 100, I was thinking about, do I put this in a book? And someone actually through a book club, they invited me to come and talk, not about my book because I didn't have a book at the time, but they made the suggestion. They said, everything that you're presenting, it's really, something that could really help students and families. It really is pulling the curtain back on the admissions office. So you really need to write a book. And so I did. It was just published this past November. It's brand new, hot off the press. So Lisa, take it away. Let's select some winners.
Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. We've got a little app here and and I've got our list of registrants. I'm going to go and we're going to do our Q&A. How about this? I'm going to do a raffle. We'll answer a couple questions, raffle off another book because we've got a good number of questions to get through.
Fantastic.
So, and then I'm going to call your name, but then go ahead and just email me. You can reply to the email that you got from Flourish Coaching from me for tonight's webinar. And then John will be sure to get the book out. So our first winner is, let's see, number 28, Marilena. Your email starts, it just has first names. Email starts with CHACO. I'm going to stop there. Send me an email tonight or tomorrow, lisa@flourishcoachingco.com, and we will get your book mailed out to you. Let's take a couple questions and then we'll raffle off another book.
Right.
Okay. In some of these, John, I think we both can answer most of them. I have been a college major and career coach, for those of you that are new to my world, because we got some new registrants for the webinar, for the last, well, now going on like 16 years. And I worked as an IEC since 1999. So this is why all of this is super interesting to me too. So questions that were submitted in advance get to go first. First one. Can a college admission officer help me regarding financial aid? Can they guide me in terms of the college's policies and terms? John, I think I'll let you take that one. You ask a lot about paying for college, scholarships, financial aid.
Yeah, absolutely. So they could give you, so typically what happens is that they could certainly give you general information. In many cases, they'll refer you to their financial aid office. So there's something called the net price calculator, which I recommend that everybody use. So the net price calculator is something that they don't see, you fill it out. And what I suggest is fill it out honestly with your family. And so the way it was explained to me, you could search, for example, I don't know, Fairfield University net price calculator. And so you fill it out, and what it does, it basically looks at past students or current students that have a similar profile to give you a general idea of what the actual ticket price will be if in fact you're lucky enough to be admitted to whatever school that you're applying to. So the admissions reps will definitely give you general information. Typically, they will refer you to their financial aid offices. But what I want to add to that, which I didn't mention during the podcast episode, is the importance of using that net price calculator.
Yeah, good advice. And it can be frustrating to fill those out, but here's the deal. The colleges that you can fill them out like in a quick second, you don't get a good and accurate result. The ones that are a little bit more of a pain in the rear end to fill out, you're actually getting a better result that will be more accurate as far as what your family might ultimately end up paying for that school. Okay, next question. I'm going to take this one because it is about my favorite topic, which is college majors and careers. So this was the first question that was submitted via our form. Is pre-med or pre-law a major? How does my schedule look for me if I were to take one of those pathways? Will my classes align with medicine and law? What is the main difference of someone taking a major with and without pre-med, pre-law? So those are not majors. There are prerequisites for medical school. And I have a previous episode on my podcast. When John's answering a question, I'll put it over into the chat where I've been putting all of the resources that we've been mentioning today. But pre-med has prerequisites that a student must take in undergrad to be eligible to be admitted to medical school. So you want to make sure that you're meeting the prerequisites, but you can major in anything. And quite frankly, what we've seen is a shift away from when I was in college in the 1980s, scary to say that, to today where they wanted science majors historically. Now they really are wanting people that, students that are more well-rounded. And so you see communications majors getting in, you see music majors getting in. Any major goes for either one of these career pathways. And so make sure that there are no prerequisites for law school, other than most schools are going to have you take the LSAT and do well on that and have good grades. But you can major in anything for either one of these pathways. You know, I always advise that we should be curating experiences. We should be vetting the careers, be more focused on the careers than the name of the major, right? There are often multiple majors that lead to a career. Yes, there are like nursing and teaching. John and I both started out as teachers in our early careers. Yes, you have to have an exact major, but for more careers, you do not. So love that question.
I just add something,
Yeah.
Tony? Because your answer was amazing, but it reminded me of an episode I did. I actually did 2 episodes with Michael Lucino. Michael is out of Temple University. So Michael came back on the 2nd episode. He actually brought a nursing student. He wanted to come back to highlight one of his programs. And, I know we're talking pre-med and pre-law, but I just, for people that are interested in those competitive fields, such as nursing, it became clear, in the case of Temple University, they only have 112 nursing spots. And that's because of basically the internships, the partnership with the local hospital. So because of that, that's it. It's 112. So the nursing student that actually came on, she talked about how in high school, she volunteered. She had a connection, I guess. She actually worked at a hospital. She worked at a nursing home where her grandmother was. And what Michael explained to me was that because a kid like that, you never a shoe in, by the way, there's no guarantees, but he explained that in a competitive field of nursing where they only accept 112 kids, he said, when we see a kid that tried it, that has internship experience, real world experience, it really adds to the overall application because here's a kid that tried it and still wants it, is still pursuing it, as opposed to someone who has straight A pluses, but has never ever, felt what it's like to be a nurse. And so you might give yourself an advantage. Again, there's never any guarantees, but being that we're talking about competitive fields like pre-med, pre-law, nursing, I just wanted to share that piece of information with the listeners.
Yeah, I had John Rice from the University of San Francisco on the podcast early on. You guys can just Google it. But he worked at the time, he has a different role now. He was in nursing admissions and at the University of San Francisco, and this is not uncommon for nursing, since you brought up nursing, that you have to apply to that major in the 12th grade. They will not allow anybody to switch into that major ever once they're on campus. That is not uncommon for competitive majors. So, okay, next book is for Alyssa, Alyssa. Your email address starts with ENDE, and I'm going to leave it at that. Send us an email. We're going to be happy to get you a book. Okay, next question. John, I think this one's perfect for you with what brought you to the podcast and the book and your world. Is there anything I should avoid as a student? So this came in from a student. Is there anything I should avoid as a student when approaching a college admissions officer?
I think the best advice that I can give you is when you approach them, first of all, approach them with confidence, give some eye contact. Don't be afraid. They are admissions officers. If they could truly admit everybody, believe me, they would want to. You know, they're good people. You know, they want to help, which is why I'm fortunate enough to have so many of them on the podcast. But my advice would be when you're approaching them, show that you did your research. You know, if you approach them and ask them a question that is so easily found on the front page of their admissions website, it's really not going to give a great impression, right? You want to be thoughtful. You want to be mindful of whatever the question is. And I think that, you know, you have to approach it anytime you're looking at it, talking to an admissions rep. It's like a job interview, right? Whether or not, by the way, they're going to use that conversation as part of, you know, the overall application. You know, we talk about demonstrating your interest and whether or not schools use it or not. The bottom line is that you want to show that you did a little bit of homework and you want to ask questions that are not just so easily found by looking at their website.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. This is the last one that was put in ahead of time, and then we're going to move on to the questions that came in tonight. How should I present myself in the personal statement? How do I talk about me, but also be appealing to the readers? And I know we talked about some of this. What is a wow factor admissions are looking for in college essays? And I do want to say we put some resources of excellent essays over in the chat. John, I went over and grabbed the Johns Hopkins and the Hamilton resources and put them in the chat for you guys. From my standpoint as a college major and career coach, one of the biggest mistakes I see made is that students use their personal statement to talk about their college major choice or their career aspirations. When John, you did a great job describing how they're really just wanting to get to know you, right? The colleges that want to know about who admit directly to majors or majors really playing a role, they have supplemental questions. You know, why our school? Why that major? And that's really where that should be discussed. So I think, you know, the wow factor is authenticity. I don't know, John, anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, I think we covered a lot of what we should or shouldn't include in the personal statement. So I don't want to repeat what's there. But if you're struggling with it, you know, one piece of advice that I can give is ask your 2 or 3 best friends to be honest and just describe what comes to mind when they think of you. And even if it's something that's not, you know, the most positive thing, just jot down what do people say about you. You know, I could share that, like, for example, with me, you know, I happen to be of Italian descent. I have a wood burning pizza oven in my backyard. So not that I'm applying to college, but I'll tell you what, I'd probably use that as a topic to really give insight in terms of my personality. Now, I'm sure that probably doesn't fit whoever's asking the question's personality, but I think asking people that are near and dear to you how they perceive you and just look for common themes and come up with, you know, something that is really important to you and use that topic to, you know, don't focus the topic is important, but what's more important is how you use the topic to give insights in terms of who you are. You know, is there something that's near and dear to you? Why? Again, what are the questions that you ask yourself? Did something happen and you needed to pivot? What was your reflection? You want to give insight in terms of who you are as a person. That's where your personality has to shine through. So I like the idea of, yes, you could go to a family member too, but perhaps start with some of your best friends. You know, what do they say about you, and see if a theme comes about that maybe you could use in your essay, in your personal statement.
Love that. Okay, first question that came in, and I've got
May I
a,
just interrupt for a second?
yeah.
I'm going to go to the last slide,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'll stay on for as long as possible. I just wanted to show that this QR code, a quick thing for everyone who, and I hope everyone is still on, it's very important for me to continue refining this presentation. So this QR code is to a Google form. It is completely anonymous, and it will take you no more than 3 minutes to complete. If you could just give me honest feedback. If I was awful, no problem. Tell me that I was awful.
Ah.
If something that resonated or didn't resonate, something that I could do better. I really want the honest feedback, because I have a lot of these conversations set up moving forward, and I really want to do the best that I can. So please scan that QR code, and please take the 3 minutes to fill it out, when you can, hopefully tonight.
And John,
Yeah.
I will send me that link when we
Oh.
finish, and I will put that in our follow-up email tomorrow
Oh,
for you.
great. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you so much.
happy to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. What is the best way to start making your college list to ensure you're picking schools that are the right fit for you? What kinds of factors should you take into consideration? i.e., if a student thinks they want to stay close to home, should they automatically rule out schools that are further away? So the first thing, I'm going to give you guys a little resource. So I have a college list building tutorial. It's free. I'm going to drop it in the chat. And what I'm doing here is I'm giving you questions, worksheets, conversation starters so that you as a family can be talking to get on the same page. And conversations are where you start. So that's the first thing that you need to do. As a mama, I'm going to tell you guys, I did not want my kids to fall in love with a school that was out of budget for me. I don't have a money tree in my backyard, like most of you probably don't either. And I share that to say, like, my firstborn, he'll be 27 in April. When we were going through this, he was a very strong test taker. So, 99th percentile. So you can imagine, and this was back in 2015, the amount of literature that was being mailed to our home. And when something from the University of Chicago would come in, I would go over and I would drop it into the trash can. And he caught me doing this, and he was like, Mom is so offended. That's a federal offense. That's my mail. Ha ha ha, Trent. And he probably would still say that. And I said, here's the deal. That is out of my budget. And even if you loved it, it's not realistic for our family. And so I don't want kids there's two things I want to avoid before they get on a campus and they fall in love with a campus and a social life, because that tends to be the kids' first go-to, is number one, a school that we can't afford as parents. John gave you great advice on net price calculators as a starting point. Number two, for me as a career coach, I don't want a kiddo to fall in love with a school, a campus, but that campus doesn't have their major that they need, or any of the majors that could potentially lead to their career. So if they do want one of those fields, if they're a good fit for architecture or engineering or education or nursing, job careers that require a very specific degree and license and credentials, and they're in love with a school that doesn't have it, they might have to transfer later. So I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. We're not making forever decisions on careers here, but we're making an informed first decision. And I think it's important to do that work starting as early as 10th grade. So that's what I would say on the college list. Start by talking. I wouldn't force a kid to go look far away. I always say start close to home. I'm lucky. Cincinnati, Ohio, where I live, you all, we have a dozen schools within 45 minutes to an hour, right? Or more. So we can see a large variety close to home, and then we can start to move outward from there. John, what do you want to add?
Well, first of all, I thought that was a comprehensive answer, and thank you for that. And I guess what I'll add is, the old cliche, being true to yourself. But I want to expand upon that a little bit. So and I love what Rick Clark said once. He said, a student that applies to Dartmouth and UPenn, they didn't do their homework, right? They're just applying to any school because he said those two schools could not be more different. So I think if students understand to take a break from where mom and dad went, forgive me, mom and dad, I'm sorry, where your friends are applying to, really reflect and use the experience to be true to yourself. Do you want to be close to home, far from home, suburban, urban environment? Do you want a big school, small school, medium-sized school? And stop worrying about the rankings. If a school is in the top 20 consistently for the last 50 years, but that school is an airplane ride away and it's in a rural area, for example. And you want to be like my daughter, no more than a 2-hour car ride away and in a suburban area, for example, then that school is not for you.
Yeah.
So you have to really be mindful of stop looking at where your friend is going or, someone telling you must go to this school if it's not the right fit for you. And, one thing that we don't talk much about is the anatomy of the transfer, right? So many students end up transferring, and there's nothing wrong with that. Guess what?
Yeah.
I transferred, okay, after my first year, but that's a whole other story. My point being is that I'm willing to bet that students that end up transferring, they probably didn't take the time to think about things that when you're in high school, maybe it doesn't seem that important to you, but it really is, because a lot of people are excited about going away, and it's very exciting. But, do you want to be in a warm climate? A cold climate is, again, the distance, you have to be honest with yourself and then work with your family to find schools that fit within the financial fit to, hopefully make it a successful journey through college.
I love that you brought up transfers. I did do a podcast. It's episode 140. I'm going to put it in the chat with Jamie Smith, and it's called Avoiding the Pitfalls of College Transfers. It was excellent. And she does address in there planned transfers because there is such a thing as planned transfers for some families, and it can be good for you to consider that. That's usually got a financial reason behind it. But that's a great listen, and Jamie was a great guest. Okay, let's see. Next question. Oh, actually, I did our next book. Jessica Caven. So your email address told me your last name, Jessica. So Jessica, email me tomorrow and we'll work on getting that book out to you. Okay, next question. When searching for social fit, when are college tours recommended? John, I'm going to let you start that one.
Yeah, so I think it's important, if it's at all possible, to go when school is in session. If you go to a college campus, frankly, on a Saturday morning early, it's going to be a ghost town. And on Sunday mornings, it's even bigger, a ghost town. Because the truth of the matter is, if it's a commuter campus, a lot of kids sometimes go home on weekends at certain schools, which is a good question to ask, by the way. Is this a commuter school? What's the percentage of students that stay on campus? But, going back to the example of what I explained with my daughter, we were fortunate. Penn State started very late August, but my daughter and I, was still on vacation from my work as a high school principal. And at the time, she was obviously a high school student. So we were able to go in late August when they were in session that particular year. And it really gave us a lot of insight into what it feels like, on a typical day on campus. And so I know it's hard, but if you can do that, you should. Now, if you can't do it before applying, I could understand. And by the way, when we talk about visiting campus, a lot of times it's because of money. It costs money, especially if you have to do a hotel stay or if you're taking a flight. But it's also, very difficult to coordinate everybody's schedule, right? So I always say if you can't visit before applying, you definitely owe it to yourself to visit at least once before matriculating, because you don't want to come to the campus for the first time where you're actually a student, right? Because if all of a sudden you hit some culture shock, that's not a good way to start. So again, if you could visit while they're in session, I highly recommend that.
I'm going to add to it. When my kids were doing college visits, I would put feelers out, and even campuses where I didn't know another student who was attending there. And I would say to my network, hey, does anybody have know of a student that goes to University of Alabama? And I would take out, I mean, what college student doesn't want a free meal, right? And so with my kiddo, my own child, and I would take this other student out and I would say, hey, we would love to take you out. We just want to pick your brain about the school. And that is another fantastic way that's really super authentic to learn about the campus from a student. And all college kids like free food. Okay, next question. Should you try to visit colleges prior to making your list and or applying? Safety, target, reach. So we sort of answered this a little bit earlier. Do you need to visit some in each category? I will say this, before I finish answering or reading the question, your reach schools are usually going to be full pay. A lot of those schools don't offer merit. And so I think there's a financial consideration there. So you might not want to go on a reach campus if you're not going to be able to afford to be full pay. And by the way, at some schools these days, full pay means $80,000 to $100,000 a year. And then how important is visiting the school in session? We just answered that. And do you recommend anything in addition to the tour? I like the meal. I also like, so they've got the general campus tour and information session, but many schools also have what they call like college or major close-ups. So try to go, if your kid's interested in engineering, try to go on a day when the engineering school is doing what we call a close-up. That's my term for it. Some colleges call it that. Because generally speaking, like the engineering school is not going to offer that every single day, or the health sciences school or the education school, so that you're able to explore careers and talk to them about outcomes and different majors. So I would add that if you are able to do that. John, anything you'd add to that?
You covered it, but what I would add to that is that it's also good to start local, regardless of whether you intend to go to the local schools, and you mentioned where you live, Lisa, that there's, whatever you said, 6 to a dozen schools within an hour or whatever.
Yeah.
Start locally, and even if you don't intend to go to those schools, because I think you start to get a feel of what campuses look like, and you'll get a feel of what is important to you. And what I did with my family, I loved it. When the girls were in high school, early, we would take, long weekend trips. We would drive down the coast, wherever we would go, and we would make it our business to just go see some campuses as part of it, right? So start local, be mindful of perhaps incorporating it in family trips slowly just to get a taste. And then you'll start to develop a feel of what it is that you're looking for. I did it with my family and we enjoyed it. We really did. The part that we didn't enjoy was, again, when my little one didn't have, the great grades that so many students do, that's when we felt the stress. But in terms of researching schools as a family, we did whatever we can to try to bring us together. And we disagreed on so many things. My wife wanted our daughters basically to stay home. I was okay with going away, and but enjoy it. Just try to enjoy it. Yeah.
It can be fun. Okay, here's a college major career question. If you have a potential major / career in mind and your coursework and activities support that, bravo, because that's a huge piece of that. Should you focus your search on colleges that have strong programs in that major, specifically that you're speaking to international relations? Yes, not all majors are, not all colleges that offer a major are strong for that major. When John answers, when he takes it away to answer the next question, I've got a resource where I show you how to use the College Navigator website to see how many students are graduating before you even visit. And you can email admissions and ask them this as well, but you can quickly look up how many students graduated in that major and then calculate what percentage of that cohort's class, that class's graduating class was made up of that major. If you go on this resource that I'm going to give you, collegenavigator.gov, and you find that, well, there were only, there was one student or two students, that college is not sinking money into wooing great professors to come to their school. They're not putting their money behind that major. So just because a college offers a major does not mean that that's where you necessarily want to go for that major. Yes, you want to go where they're strong because they're going to probably have better job opportunities or grad school opportunities. So it's going to impact the outcome afterwards. I would add that. John, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, I thought you gave a great answer, Lisa. I think we're good with that one.
Okay. And I will put that resource in just a second. Okay. I have an upcoming podcast episode in April on this topic. So, and John, I know I've heard you ask this. I wonder if you ask it every single week because sometimes I don't get to every episode. With the onset of significant AI use, how do colleges disambiguate essays from students versus mostly AI written? I'm sure you're having conversations around this, aren't you?
Yeah, no, we definitely are, and colleges are definitely trying to figure out different ways to assess students. But at the end of the day, AI is a great tool to help you with many things, but AI does not replace the essence of who you are. So the only person that can really describe in detail you in terms of your thought process, in terms of your reflections, it's got to be authentic. It's got to be your voice. And, you have to imagine that when you're an admissions rep reading 40 essays a day in the heart of the admissions review process, they become really strong at being able to decipher what's AI generated and what is, frankly, the voice of a 17-year-old. So, in addition to that, just, you have to understand that these people are really experienced at reading essays. The tools that help detect whether something is AI generated or not, although they're not perfect, in terms of detecting it, they're getting a lot better, a lot better.
Yeah.
So, I would absolutely advise you do not want to use AI to write your essay. I've had reps share that if they, see that it's an AI generated essay, game over. You just missed out on being accepted there. So it's something that we're all dealing with, even at the high school level, at every level. And it's a great tool, by the way, but when used appropriately, right? We don't want to plagiarize.
Yeah.
We don't want to steal information. So don't do it. That's the advice.
I know some colleges are starting to come up with a policy in what is acceptable use of AI. So check before for each of the colleges that you'll be applying to. Interestingly, like I love Grammarly because it used to just catch your TWO versus TO when you're typing quickly. The problem now is, and I do have premium, so I'm not sure about the free version, but now it's starting to suggest how to improve your writing. And that's where it can get picked up. Another quick tip on AI is students write your essays in a Google Doc. We all know that you can go up to the little clock at the top and you can see the history of the document. And last year, I heard, it wasn't one of my students that I worked with, but I heard a story in one of our independent educational consultants groups about a student who actually was accused of using AI, claimed that they hadn't, and it was the history of their edits in the Google Doc that actually proved that the student had written that actual essay. So I thought that was fantastic, crowdsourcing of how do we get around this. So I think that's a good idea to try. So the next question, do all schools accept or request supplemental essays? So not all schools do. I threw in the chat earlier a resource I have that has been on my website for a long time that teaches you how you can go into the Common App, which is just over 1,000 schools use it. So it's a lot of the most popular common schools. And locate even ahead of time as a sophomore, a junior, what as supplemental essays are they asking? So I've got a video on how to locate them. But a lot of them do. And some of them really competitive ones do, and they have a lot of them because they really want you to have to put in a lot of work if you're going to be a serious applicant. I just got in a conversation with somebody from WOW Writing Workshops. That's actually going to be my guest on AI. And I said, what do you think the most popular supplemental essays are? And she said, it's why us, followed by why this major? Why am I applying to this major? Other common ones are, what's the community that you belong in and that you serve? That would be a common one. What's an intellectual curiosity you have? Things like that. John, do you guys talk a lot about supplemental essays?
We do, and like I said during the presentation, we really talk about the one. Then you're right. There's definitely, there are schools that ask for 4 supplementals, right? But the one that we talk most about is, why NYU, for example, New York University, and that's what I was talking about earlier. Where with something like that, it's important to demonstrate your understanding of that institution. I again advise read the mission, the philosophy statement, see if there's something there that really gives you insight in terms of what that school is about. To go back to what Ian Shackner, the Cornell rep, said, don't just add something there that is a Google search. We don't want that. We want to see something deep. And so again, demonstrating your understanding. What did you do in high school that resonates, that shows that you're in line with their values? And talk about what you plan on doing moving forward and why that specific school. If you could put all of that in the supplemental, again, like I said earlier, there's no guarantee, but it's really important to be mindful again of the different parts and how they have to complement each other. What is each part intended to do? And so when you have that falls under the umbrella of what you control. Again, no guarantee that you're going to get into whatever school, but understanding those nuances, I think, is very important.
I know, John, we've both been guests on Dave Peterson's Scholarship GPS podcast.
Yes.
And he's been on my podcast a couple times. Actually, today, I think he was on.
Great.
We record these so far in advance. I'm like, I don't know what day they're coming out. I'm pretty sure it came out today. And he even said for private scholarships, it's the same thing. Like they're looking for an alignment of values that you know who they are and you fit with what they want to be supporting with their money or with the seat at their university. So, okay, what is the difference between, John, I'll let you start with it, deferred versus waitlisted?
Yeah, so deferred usually happens when, you are, for example, applying ED. So early decision is a binding agreement. And so they review your application and you're qualified, but for whatever their reasons are, they're going to defer you, which means that they put you in the general application pool. So for example, their regular decision rounds. Waitlisted usually happens when you apply regular decision, for example, or early action, excuse me. And again, you're qualified. The problem is because of all of those institutional priorities and the data that we shared earlier, even though you're qualified, they're not quite ready to give you a seat just yet. So they put you on the wait list. So those are the things that, the students dread, the dreaded wait list. and even being deferred. But the good thing about them is that it's not a no, it's a, we have to keep considering, and it's a maybe and perhaps a yes later on,
Yep. I'm going to do another book because we still have 2 books to give away, and we've got one more question that came in. Next book is for number 17. Number 17 was Linda Bergson. Again, your email address told me your last name. So send us an email and with your address, and we'll be happy to get that out to you. Okay. Last question that came in, and if you've got one, say it now or forever hold your peace, my friends. When it comes to internships or college programs, should we avoid the ones that cost money, like those over $1,000? I've heard that paid programs aren't as valuable as the ones you apply to and get accepted into for free. There are differing opinions on this. John, I don't know where we're going to land together. Do you want to start? I'm sure we're both going to have stuff to add on this one.
Yeah, I mean, the first episode, the first conversation that comes to mind when you ask that question, again, I point to Ian Shackner, who was phenomenal, by the way. And it doesn't matter whether you're applying to Cornell University or not, you really should hear Ian. He was just so thoughtful in his responses. He was amazing. And what he talked about, for his institution, and he talked in general about many institutions, is that they see it as, look, it's an equity issue, right? Just because you do a summer program, at a particular school, they see it as an equity issue. Look, there are some families that could afford it, right? And there are others that can't quite afford it, right? Maybe because they're saving their money to pay for the tuition bill should they get in. And so, he didn't recommend it. So I don't think it's necessary, right? I don't. That's my opinion. I think that there's a lot of things that you can do with your summer to show that, to show the type of community member that you're going to be. So I don't know that it's necessary to pay, for these different programs out there. That's my opinion, Lisa.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary at all. I think you can DIY it. I never paid for my kids to go to high price programs like that. And I don't think that they're bad. Well, an internship. So first of all, you should never be paying for an internship. I will say that. But like the high school, summer college programs, they're not bad. I mean, you got to remember it's a business. So these campuses are empty in large part over the summer. And a lot of times, sometimes it's the university that offers the summer college program, but sometimes it's an outside agency who's just paying the university to use their campus. Now, it can be a great way to get a taste for what's dorm life like? What do I like this campus? These programs, a lot of times, they are very specific to certain careers and majors. It could help you get a little bit more clarity on your path. That's great. It's not necessary, but it is absolutely fantastic experience. And it will not give you an advantage of getting into that school. So, one time one of the students I was working with looked at a specific program at Duke. It did align with his career exploration that we were working on and his career development. But he also wanted to go to Duke, and he and his parents thought that it was thousands of dollars to do this program that he wanted to do. This was a while ago. He thought maybe it would crack open the door a little bit wider for him. And I'm like, absolutely not. I mean, it absolutely does not impact you getting into that school. So don't do it for that reason, would be my advice. Like, just consider your why. Why are you going to do it? Could you do something that money might be better spent elsewhere? So, begin with why. We hear that all the time, right?
Absolutely.
Looks like we got one more that just came in the chat. Is there a good number of schools to visit? i.e. sweet spot 15 to 20? What is it? I'll let you start that one, John.
Wow, that's a great question. And I guess it's going to be a little bit of a cop out, but it's true. In my opinion, it's really situational. It depends. There are students that know that, these are my top 3 schools that I want, and so they don't need to visit 20. I think 20 is a little much in my opinion.
I agree.
But I think it's really reflecting on what's important to you. Is it a major that you're looking for? Is it a particular geographic area that you're looking for? And then, work on your list and start the process of visiting schools. But it's hard to say a number because it's going to differ from student to
Yeah.
student.
I agree. I think that you're going to start to get a feel for if you need to. If you start out and it's kind of like well, I've got 2 daughters that are engaged right now. So, by the way, parents, just when you start paying for college, then you can start paying for weddings and grandchildren, my friends. So I still have not officially gotten a pay raise since I quit paying for college a little over a year ago, but that is life. But it's interesting, like my daughter so I've got 2 stepkids and my 3 kids. So I'll talk about my daughter. She had in mind a certain type of wedding gown that she thinks she wants. We haven't gone shopping yet, but of course she's like on Pinterest and Instagram and saving all the things. And her sister is getting married this May 30th on our 10-year anniversary, hijacking our date. And so my daughter was getting her bridesmaid's dress, and she ended up with a bridesmaid dress that she has now fallen in love with. And because of how it fits and how it looks on her, she's totally rethinking what she wants for her own wedding gown. And I share that story to say, it's like I bought a new car at the end of December. They pulled me in with their end of year, but it'd been 8 years, so it was time. And I test drove stuff and I found what I liked, right? So these are test drives. And if you start out test driving campuses that you ultimately find, kind of like John, you talking about your daughter going to Penn State, like, what the world? No, I need a smaller school. She had no idea until she tried it on. So then you ultimately are going to probably have to go visit some additional campuses. But if you suspect that, something might work and you get on and you're like, oh, yeah, I like this, I think you're going to learn as you go. And that's why, again, I got that college list building tutorial. It's not to build your list, it's to tutor you on how to have the conversations so that you know what the parameters are that you're looking for. So you hopefully do fewer lists or fewer visits and apply to fewer colleges. I think 20's overkill myself.
Agreed.
So, okay, last book winner, actually somebody from our college major and career coaching course, Melissa O'Cole. So that's our last book. So you are our last lucky winner. This has been so much fun. John, we got to do this again.
I would love to. This has been amazing. I hope we added value. I think we did, but I hope we did. I hope
The
that
chat would say that we did.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. That's what
So,
we're trying to do
and
here.
we both, I'm always looking for like what you guys want to hear on my podcast. I mean, John's always going to be talking to the colleges. I truly, I want to just cast a wide net for the topics that are resonating with my audience. So, Stacy, lucky, as Stacy said, it's only 6 p.m. where I am. Well, yes, she recognizes, John, that you and I are on Eastern time. And
Yes.
yes, it's after 9. So thank you, my friends. This has been wonderful. We will be in touch tomorrow. And I'm going to go ahead and I will get, John will give me the website so that he can get your feedback. So, okay.
Absolutely.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you all. Take
see
care.
you on our podcasts.
Take care all. Thank you.
Bye.